This video describes how the Germans are using some Sikhs to divide us so that we kill each other. Hello friends, this is Unmasked Truth with Harmanjeet Saini, where I provide unique analysis of world events based on the unmasked truth that after surrender, Germany continued World War II clandestinely and became a killing machine. I also provide true news that you will find nowhere else. You can trust the Germans to capitalize on every opportunity to divide their enemies so that they destroy themselves. I would like to point out to Sikhs the new diabolical scheme of the Germans to do just that. In the case of the Germans, when I use the term diabolical, I literally mean that they are genuinely guided by Satan the devil. Humans generally cannot come up with such devilish schemes on their own thinking as the Germans do. The new scheme involves propping up Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale's statue so that many Sikhs will follow his teachings and start killing those Sikhs who oppose them, just as Bhindranwale did. The key here is that Bhindranwale was a Sikh and he and his followers murdered other Sikhs whose views on Sikhism were different from his. Therefore, the German design is that if his teachings are made to appear scholarly and the work of a Sikh saint, all those who follow his teachings will commit similar acts, which would be to start killing fellow Sikhs who oppose or have different religious views. Germans and Satan the devil specialize in taking advantage of such opportunities. Who are the people being used to portray Bhindranwale as a scholar and a great saint? My guess is that they are Sikhs who may have committed the crime of murdering a white adult or child of British or American descent to receive financial rewards from the Germans and their Indian allies. They are now being blackmailed to write such books and articles praising Bhindranwale. In addition, German masqueraders themselves and some Hindu writers in alliance with the Germans are also writing such books. Some have recently written them, and articles to portray Bhindranwale as a great Vidwan of Sikhism, defender of the faith, and a holy saint. The truth is that Bhindranwale had very little formal education, only some inaccurate, limited, not holistic knowledge of the Sikh scriptures. He was enrolled in his village school at the age of 6, but dropped out 5 years later to work with his father on the farm. At the age of 18, his father enrolled him at the Damdami Taksal, a religious school. After a 1-year course in Sikh studies, he returned to farming. He was married at age 19, but maintained contact with the religious school, dividing his time between farming to support his family and continued affiliation with the Damdami Taksal. His religious education could be compared to rote learning of students in Islamic madrasas, which hardly made him a scholar. But such was the training of Sikh priests who worked in village-level gurdwaras or even in small towns. They certainly did not have any formal degrees in Sikh studies or Sikh scriptures. Only a handful of people have PhD level education in Sikh studies or even Sikh scriptures. In religious matters, Sikh priests who are heads of village level gurdwaras are looked up to in the villages because in the 1970s they were often some of the better educated people in the village. Villagers considered them as vidwans or learned scholars. That is why they could garner a following. I know this from personal knowledge and experience of village life in Punjab, and that's why Bhindranwale gained a large following among rural Sikhs. While attempts are being made to paint Bhindranwale as a religious learned man, based on my personal experiences in Punjab at that time, I fully stand by my assessment of him and that of the Sikh historian and journalist Khushwant Singh, the author of A History of Sikhs. I see this as a diabolical attempt to prop up Bhindranwale so that his followers and their descendants can start murderous activities in Punjab against Sikhs like Bhindranwale did, in the name of returning to the pure religion of Guru Gobind Singh. Here is Khushwant Singh's assessment of Bhindranwale's activities in his book A History of the Sikhs, Volume 2, Second Edition. He writes on page 324. Jarnail Singh received little formal education apart from learning passages of the Granth by rote and acquiring an elementary knowledge of Sikh mythology. These enabled him to establish a rapport with the largely illiterate and semi-literate Sikh peasantry which understood the language he spoke. To start with, his message was simple: a return to the Spartan traditions, meaning no stress on material things, which means frowning on economic and industrial development. So, to start with, his message was simple: a return to the Spartan traditions in, of the Khalsa Panth initiated by Guru Gobind Singh and renounce the evils of modernism. He toured villages exhorting people to give up drinking, taking drugs, smoking, and dishonoring emblems of the faith, meaning unshorn hair and beards, by cutting them, means no trimming of beards. To that I would add giving up eating meat. Those who agreed to do so he baptized or rebaptized in the presence of large congregations. His strongest supporters at the time were women and children who had suffered at the hands of their drunken or doped fathers, husbands, or brothers. Bhindranwale's Amrit Prachar, meaning propaganda or propagating through the nectar of baptism, was a resounding success. Adults in their thousands took oaths in public to abjure liquor, tobacco, and drugs and were baptized. Video cassettes showing blue films in cinema houses lost out to the village Gurdwara. Men not only saved money they had earlier squandered in self indulgence, but now worked longer hours on their lands and raised better crops. They had much to be grateful for to Jarnail Singh, who came to be revered by them as Baba, meaning elder, or Sant, meaning saint, Jarnail Singh Ji. Ji is added as a mark of honor. So he came to be revered by them as Baba Sant Jarnail Singh Ji Khalsa Bhindranwale. Khushwant Singh describes other reasons for his popularity. Bhindranwale expanded his role from that of a preacher to a settler of disputes. Peasants who had wasted years in litigation and paying lawyers came to him for help. The parents of women pestered for dowry sought his intervention. His retinue of armed followers ensured that his verdicts were carried out. Now, this is a key aspect of Bhindranwale's success in settling disputes. His retinue of armed followers ensured that his verdicts were carried out. So people were scared of being murdered by his followers if they did not agree with and carry out his verdicts. His brand of justice and settlement of disputes flowed from the barrel of a gun. Thus, Bhindranwale and his followers had a threatening, intimidating presence. Khushwant Singh continues. He sported a beard that flowed down to his navel, which he advocated all Sikhs should do, and he added to his image by wearing across his chest a bandolier charged with bullets, with pistols in holsters on either side of his hips. In his hand he carried a silver arrow of the kind carried by Guru Gobind Singh and Maharaja Ranjit Singh. He was no great orator, but his rough, rustic vocabulary was full of disparaging references to Hindus as dhotiyan wale, means loincloth wearers, and topiyan wale, cap wearers, and references to Mrs. Indira Gandhi as Bamani, meaning a Brahmin woman, and Panditanditi, or daughter of Pandits. It went down well with his audiences. He provided excellent copy for journalists. He acquired the charisma of an acerbic-tongued saint warrior. Using such derogatory terms to describe people of other faiths who live together certainly aroused hatred for him and his religion. He fanned the flames of hatred. Bhindranwale preached a message of hate. Khushwant Singh writes on page 326, he took those passages from the sacred text which suited his purpose and ignored or glossed over others that did not. On top of the hate list were apostates, patits, who dishonored emblems of the Khalsa by cutting their long hair and beards, smoked, drank liquor, or took drugs. Khushwant Singh forgets to add that Bhindranwale prohibited eating of meat. However, these Patits could be redeemed if they agreed to amend their ways and accepted baptism. Next on the list were Sant Nirankaris, who had gained a sizable following among the Sikhs. They had committed the cardinal sin of recognizing a living human being as their guru when it was an article of Sikh faith that only the holy book, the Granth Sahib, was the living embodiment of the 10 gurus. The Sant Nirankaris had also fabricated their own sacred texts, Yug Purush and Avatar Bani. They were therefore beyond redemption and had to be liquidated. That's why Bhindranwale was dangerous and his ways were destructive to peace and harmony in Punjab. Finally, there were the Hindus. The only way of dealing with them was to treat them with contempt as an effeminate, non-martial race and a lesser breed without the law. People who are now trying to portray Bhindranwale as a saint conveniently leave out these views that he held. Of course, one can find some of his later denials of holding such views, which human nature tells us that anybody who is accused of any wrong promptly denies such accusations. Now let me share with you my personal experiences with the impact Bhindranwale's teachings had on me. I was in India till August 1981. That's when I left for the United States to pursue higher studies. Till then, though I had been living mainly outside of Punjab as an MBA student and in Mumbai for a few months for a job, by that time I had begun to feel the effects of the violence in Punjab due to the activities of Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale whenever I was in Punjab. He had been advocating pure Sikhism of the Gurus, renouncing modernism, keeping of long hair, and abstaining from smoking alcohol and eating meat. After 7 years of research, I had given up Sikhism and converted to Christianity in 1972-73 and cut off my long hair. I no longer wore a turban or followed any of the tenets of Sikhism. Thus, according to Bhindranwale's brand of pure Sikhism, I was an apostate, but could be redeemed if I agreed to amend my ways by never again cutting my long hair, kept a flowing beard, gave up alcohol and eating meat, and accepted baptism. If I did not return to the faith, I was in danger of being murdered by Bhindranwale's followers. This situation definitely made me feel threatened and highly uncomfortable. Like millions of other Sikhs who had cut off their long hair or trimmed or neatly tied their beards instead of letting them hang loose and free, or consumed alcohol or smoked or ate meat. I had cut off my hair, shaved, did enjoy alcohol in moderation and ate meat. I did not smoke. In Bhindranwale's world, I would have no freedom of choice of religion or to enjoy drinking alcohol in moderation or eating a good meal with meat in it. He was no different from Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and the Taliban murderers. That's what the Germans hoped to turn Punjab into again by dressing the deeply decisive teachings of Bhindranwale in respectable, scholarly, saintly garb. He was no great religious leader or saint. Bhindranwale was no different from Taliban murderers or the BJP Hindu Dattava goons who are now running around in India murdering Muslims and others who do not conform to their brand of Hinduism or are secular in their outlook. They simply do not want to allow freedom of religion or secular outlook if one chooses. Bhindranwale was not a builder of the Punjab state or anything else. He enjoyed success and following among rural people, which went to his head, especially when Sikh politicians started noticing him and propping him up as an ally in order to win more votes. If he had been allowed to continue on his path for a few years or a decade more and had gained more followers and following, he would have destroyed peace and much else in Punjab. He would have opposed industrial development in Punjab, labeling it as modernism and materialism. Again, that is just my opinion. Other people are welcome to hold a different opinion. But nobody should be murdered just because they hold a different opinion about somebody. Nobody should be forced to follow what they genuinely don't believe in. The murderers of Taliban, ISIS, Hindutva, goons of the BJP, the Bharatiya Janata Party of Prime Minister Narendra Modi do such things. I left India in August 1981. I went back to India in 1987 for a visit. Even though Bhindranwale was already dead, some Sikhs were still preaching his brand of extremism. I visited India again in 1995. By that time, the effect of his preaching had worn off to a large degree, and I no longer felt threatened while in Punjab. Here is my advice to fellow Sikhs, or I should say Punjabis. Please do not get back to the path of Bhindranwale's extremism or of Hindus of his time like Lala Jagat Narayan, who baited Sikhs to incite violence. We have gone down the path of Sikhs murdering Sikhs and Punjabis murdering Punjabis before. If we get taken in by the diabolical German schemes, we will go down that path again and destroy ourselves without the Germans or any other enemy having to lift a finger against us. Because Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale had resorted to murder to have his way, it was right to stop his activities. Violence and murder have to be contained at all costs. Again, I am not claiming that Bhindranwale was wrong in everything he did or stated, but his type of violence only begets more violence. Some took advantage of the situation in vendetta killings. The cycle had to be ended by stopping him. Sikhs had one great empire, that of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. Do you know how it ended? Because all the successors kept murdering and getting murdered. Ranjit Singh's son Khadak Singh succeeded him, but his son now Nihal Singh sought to run the government. Chet Singh Bajwa was Khadak Singh's advisor, but now Nihal Singh and the Chief Minister Dhyan Singh Dogra murdered Chet Singh Bajwa. When Khadak Singh realized that he had very little control over government, he sought solace in drinking and opium and succumbed to his excesses on November 5, 1840. Khadak Singh and now Nihal Singh died the same day. Ranjit Singh's other son Sher Singh then sought the throne, but Khadak Singh's widow Chand Kaur was declared the Maharani. Then in a battle, Sher Singh defeated Chand Kaur's forces. She was later murdered. Though the British still recognized Sher Singh as Maharaja, they gave asylum to Ajit Singh Sandhawalia and allowed him to raise troops. Thus the British exploited Sikh divisions. Sher Singh was then murdered by Ajit Singh Sandhawalia, and his 10-year-old son Pratap Singh was murdered by Lana Singh Sandhawalia. Dhyan Singh Dogra was then murdered by the Sandhawalias. Ajit Singh Sandhawalia was then killed by the army. The Sikh army then proclaimed Ranjit Singh's younger son Dalip Singh as Maharaja at 5 years of age, with Hira Singh Dogra as his chief minister. The Queen Mother Rani Janta invited her brother Jawahar Singh to be advisor to whatever Dogra did not assume full control of. Then Suchet Singh Dogra, brother of Dhyan Singh Dogra and uncle of Hira Singh Dogra, was killed by the army. Later in a battle, Atar Singh Sandhawalia, Ranjit Singh's son Prince Kashmira Singh, and Pai Bir Singh were killed. Then when Pandit Jalla, the mentor of Hira Singh Dogra, questioned Rani Janda's morality, both were killed by the Sikh army. Chhatra Singh Ahluwalia then killed Ranjit Singh's son Peshawar Singh when he had proclaimed himself king. Then Rani Janda's brother and advisor Jawahar Singh was killed by the army on September 11, 1845. I am mentioning all these killings and murders after the death of Maharaja Ranjit Singh so that we may learn from this terrible history and don't repeat these mistakes again. Within 5 years, 16 of the best successor kings, chief ministers, senior most advisors, and likely successors died, with 14 of them by murder and Khadak Singh by dissipation. We Sikhs and Punjabis simply have a tendency to murder our very best people. That never solves any problems, weakens us, and it invites outsiders to turn aside and rule us. US murders after the death of Maharaja Ranjit Singh weakened the Sikhs and allowed the British to exploit divisions among us and annex our kingdom to the empire. Even the two Anglo-Sikh wars, we defeated the British militarily, nearly annihilating their armies, despite commanders of our armies working diligently against the army. They handed over Punjab to the British as long as their Jagis were assured. More than 150 years after the events following Maharaja Ranjit Singh's death, our visible divisions and use of murderers or threats to try and solve problems have not changed. Any murder seldom solves problems. I have recently spoken out against top Punjab leadership, specifically Captain Amrinder Singh of the Congress and Pratap Singh Badal and Sukhbir Singh Badal of the Akali Dal. All of us should have the right to criticize our leadership and point out their shortcomings so that they can correct them. But their reaction to criticism is to plot the murder of the one criticizing them. I feel threatened, but I am not at all concerned. Death threats and bounties on my head by the Ayatollah Khamenei of Iran of $3 million and Frank Walter Steinmeier, president of company, with a bounty of $1 billion, and then Frank Walter Steinmeier, president's Germany, they have not dissuaded me from criticizing their evil deeds. But if we Punjabis want to make progress in terms of economic, technological, and industrial development, so that we can protect ourselves from being exterminated by the Germans, Chinese, and other Indians, we need to stop solving our problems by murder and need to follow freedom of speech. I don't want to be fighting Captain Amrinder Singh and the Badals. We need to be working together within the law for the benefit of all Punjabis. Another issue to consider is that Bhindranwale advocated a simple lifestyle. He would not have allowed economic development and enjoying its fruits by labeling it as materialism. Here is another example. As a Major General, Kuldeep Singh Brar commanded Operation Blue Star against Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale. Originally, his name was Jarnail Singh Brar, and the militants who had amassed weapons inside the Golden Temple complex. He was asked to do a job and he did it. Bhindranwale's murders had to be stopped. Now attempts are being made on General Brar's life by Sikhs. We should stop such murder attempts on our own people. We also need to be aware of how the national leadership uses us to destroy each other. Indira Gandhi could have chosen a non-Sikh or non-Punjabi general to command the Indian army to flush out Bhindranwale. But she and her advisors chose a Jat Sikh general, even with the same last name as Jarnail Singh, which was Brar, which could have been done by stopping all access to supplies over a period of time, but to kill them all. She knew that General K.S. Brar would then be targeted by other Sikhs for murder after Operation Blue Star. We allow the national Indian leadership to use us against ourselves because of our divisions and lack of assertiveness. Now a video has emerged of the Badals trying to work with Mukesh Ambani for whatever reasons. They still don't understand that the Gujaratis and Ambanis are German stooges, and the Germans, in league with the Chinese and other Indian allies, are bent upon exterminating us. Trying to walk with the Ambanis and Madani is the last thing we should be attempting. I remember a few decades ago, Ratan Tata came to know that the South Indians were trying to murder him so that they could eliminate him as a business competitor and corner all Indian manufacturing, including all other Tatas and Parsis owned. Ratan Tata then went to the South Indians to protest that they are on the same side because they are all anti-British and anti-American and German allies. Perhaps the Badals are going to Ambani with the same argument because they all have murdered a person of British descent to receive their financial rewards. But the Badals still don't recognize that the Germans want to exterminate all those who fought against us in World War II. Therefore, they have targeted the Sikhs. The Badals, Captain Amrinder Singh, and the Punjabis are not going to receive any benefits from the Ambanis or Gujaratis. The new farm laws should have taught our leaders that the other Indians are always plotting and scheming how they can drive us off our livelihoods and enslave us as landless farm laborers. But Sikhs and Punjabis, let's learn these important lessons from our history and stop shoplifting and killing one operator. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please continue to watch my videos and read my articles on important world events, World War III watch, politics, international business, advice on health and medical problems, and much more for in-depth analysis and insightful world analysis. Please also follow me on my Facebook channel www.facebook.com/unmaskedtruth to get information on the latest postings of articles and videos.